Hello and welcome to another episode of Lockdown Dads. I'm James Miller, author of Dads Don't Babysit, editor of workingdads.co.uk and father of two. And he is...
Ian Dinwiddie. I am the founder of Inspiring Dads, a coaching business that helps stressed dads to balance work and fatherhood. Got a couple of children as well. They are 11 and 8 and only recently 11 and 8, but I haven't made a mistake yet and done 10 and 7. So I'm pretty pleased with myself. I'm also really pleased with the guest that we have today, Dan Stanley. Welcome to the show. Dan is the founder of a coaching business called Better Men. He's also an ex-military man and lives, if you're on podcast, you'll miss out on this, but has the most amazing room that we both thought independently before we came on looks a lot like the Star Trek Enterprise. Dan, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you, Ian. Hi, James.
First question we always start off with, Dan, is how are you at the moment?
When I'm ever asked that question, I always think of the irony of it, because it's probably the most frequently asked question, but it's probably the question that elicits the most dishonest response. So I'll try not to fall into that trap. I'm feeling purposeful. I'm feeling available and congruent. So thank you, Ian. Yeah.
Congruent?
I haven't actually checked in today.
What that means. What's congruent?
I'm in alignment, James.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. I'm sure as the conversation unfolds, that'll become apparent as to why that's important to me. But yeah, we're into the third lockdown, I suppose. But the reality is that the lockdowns have kind of come and gone for us. And the reason I checked in with those words particularly is that we've recently suffered a family bereavement. Unexpectedly, my father-in-law passed away at the age of 66, in good health otherwise. And I was actually out on his bike when he had a heart attack. So we're nearly a month on now, and that's why I was checking in perhaps in the way that I was. I feel purposeful in how I'm utilizing my time and energy with my clients and my family and myself. And the congruency piece is that I'm sure as you probe into my background, James, you'll start to unpick parts of my story. And I wore a mask for many years in that I was perhaps a subconscious people pleaser. I was always looking for acceptance of people and positions, and I choose not to do that anymore. So I feel congruent in how I'm showing up. So yeah, that's where I'm at.
There's lots to work on. Let's knock off each other first, as it were, and then we'll come back and start picking over that, I think.
Sure.
How are you, Ian, this week?
This week, Monday, Tuesday, not very good. Really struggled for whatever reason, not sure why. Just struggled to feel like I was staying on top of things. And actually, I went and I wrote the list of the done list rather than the to-do list. To-do list is a different place. And I wrote down all the things I had done during the day. And then actually I felt much better when I cleared off 3 or 4 really small things. It made the list 4 steps later. It was 9:30 when I was doing it in the evening, which is not great, but it did make me feel slightly happier about sort of circumstances. So that was good. I don't know, just feeling a little bit drained. Snow, we had snow though, yay! And we can sled our hill just about. When about 2 inches of snow, our hill is steep enough to be able to sled down. So my daughter was sledding down the hill, quite a few other kids doing the same sort of thing. And that lasted until the gritter came, the salt machine. They grit our road, which 12 years ago when we moved in, they didn't used to do that. So you just basically, you were stuck until it melted. You couldn't drive down the road after that. But now they gritted it. So we had this kind of like, is the milkman going to get through? Is the online shopping going to get through? Then the gritter came. Yay, the gritter's here. Oh, no more sledding. So a bit of a kind of up and down there. So sort of encapsulating my week, a little bit of up and down, really.
What do we think of the word sledding? This is a thing, right? This is totally a thing these days, because when I was a kid, and it's the correct word is sledging, of course. Now, we have Australian friends, American friends. Of course, sledging is something else. The Australians are very good at sledging. They're not very good at sledding, right? Because they don't, it's bizarre. Sledding seems to be catching on. I don't know, is this a YouTube thing? Is this because all the kids are watching the Americans on YouTube, or what? It's sledging, right? You're going to sledge, you sledge, right? Surely that's the correct. Or is it just, is it a Scottish thing? Maybe it's a Scottish thing because I was, brought up there.
I don't know, but as an aside to the Australians would probably approve of, there were 2 kids out, not with sleds, they were out with bodyboards. They were bodyboarding down the snow. Needs must.
You were perhaps educated in school, James. Maybe these kids were educated on Netflix and Amazon Prime.
Exactly. I wonder a bit. Anyway, I can beat that because when we went sledging, there was a man who had taken an old cot and turned it into skis, homemade skis, and he'd made a homemade sledge for his child. I was like, right, dad goals. Come on, that. I mean, I couldn't even dream of being able to do that. You know, that's
slightly envious.
Yeah, I could never make anything out of anything. That's not my thing. But I was very I thought that was pretty cool.
That's impressive.
I'm going to try a blog for working dads about the snow for tomorrow. I mean, this isn't sort of how I am, but I think it's interesting. It points up the benefits of flexible working. Because my hours are flexible, I was able to go and do a bit of sledging, whatever it was, Monday lunchtime, or take the kids sledging. I didn't actually sledge on that occasion, but it just speaks again to the benefits of flexible working. You can move your hours around. If you get a bit of snow, let's face it, it only happens once every 2 or 3 years around, certainly where we are in South London. So flexible working is good for that. I mean, that's quite a niche argument for flexible working. There are better ones, but the more the merrier when it comes to arguments for flexible working, I'd say. But how am I? I don't know. All right. Half term next week's a bit of a worry because we can't do anything. It's going to be really boring. So that's sort of in the back of my head. And to-do lists seem a bit of a nightmare at the moment. I think that sort of weighs. I think a couple of weeks ago, I was like, don't start me on Trello. We don't need that. I've just got a bit of paper and a pen for my to-do list. The trouble is when you mark things off, they're actually still on the to-do list. So it still looks awful and slightly in your head, even though you've done things. So a done list sounds like a very good idea. You might have given away your tip too early there, Ian.
I've got a better one. I've got another tip.
Something else to look forward to. But
another one.
Okay, and I think pretty level this week, I would say. Nothing much to report on that front, which is good in the circumstances. Let's face it. Let's talk to Dan about. Let's talk about the path, right? That's what the next section is officially called, even though we don't really actually refer to that. So just fill us in on how you came to do what you do, how Better Men became your focus in particular.
So it's interesting, and this is why I was keen to come on your guys' show in a sense, that actually the birth of my daughter was a catalyst for not only the breakdown of my marriage, but also for what was an identity crisis or midlife crisis for me. So it was kind of interesting and ironic that, bringing my daughter into the world, new life as such, was actually the thing that actually brought me into the world as well. For 35 years of my life, as I kind of alluded to earlier, particularly in a military background, it's very easy with moving around between appointments to always fit into somebody else's culture and be very sort of malleable in a sense. So when Sophia came into the world, I kind of felt unsure about who I was and what I wanted. And I didn't know what to do with that at the point in time. And as most guys, when they're kind of lost or confused and they don't really know who they are and what they want, they'll find some kind of release or coping mechanism. And mine was sport. Coming from a military background, I've always been fit and active. But the reality was that I hid away. I put my head in the sand and spent lots of time in the gym or out running with my dog. My spaniel actually developed an injury that needed an operation. That's how much running I was doing, or how much avoiding I was doing. And that was the beginning of the end of what my marriage looked like at that point in time. So my wife and I separated for about 8 months. It was a very difficult time for us. We didn't adjust to being parents. My wife is an entrepreneur. She's very, very career focused. And we're kind of, for the guys that can see us on the camera, on very linear paths, which obviously doesn't work in a relationship. And particularly when you're married and you bring a child into the world, there's got to be a lot of crossover in a sense. Not just the emotional connection, but also the sense of being in a team. And we just didn't do that very well. So we separated for around 8 months. And it was a lonely time. But what happened in that space was that I kind of came to a conclusion or realization that, I wasn't the only guy that felt the way I did. And as I started to express to my friends and some of my colleagues about how I was thinking and feeling at that specific time, lots of guys started sharing with me their own experiences. And when you look through the window of social media, it's this perfectly framed, a little bit like my studio behind now, this perfectly framed image, you never really see the truth of what's going on. And The reality was a lot of people started to open up. They were talking about some of the frustrations, some of the challenges in their marriage, some of the fears around their careers or the direction in which their life was heading. And kind of gave me a realization that I'd always taken a great sense of responsibility in helping other people. And I kind of thought, if there's an opportunity here, there's an opportunity for me to use my story and my authenticity to allow other people to step into a space, other men to step into a space where they could unpack their thoughts and feelings, to really make sense of who they are and what they want, but ultimately to cultivate a mindset for success that enables them to balance their happiness and the career motivations. So yeah, from an overview, that's how it happened. There's lots more to the story, which if you want me to, I can share.
I'm wondering why Ian invited you on this podcast, because you're basically rivals. You're basically arch enemies. What's going on here? You've blundered, Ian. What are you doing? This guy's doing the same stuff as you. No, I'm joking. That's a really good thing. The more people doing it, the better. It's great to hear echoes of what you both do at each other's work. It's actually really good.
Yeah, it's all about normalizing the conversation for me. We kind of mentioned it earlier. A lot of the way that I show up in social media is to kind of challenge the status quo of masculinity. That what was handed down by our fathers from their fathers in terms of a masculine blueprint just doesn't fit in society today. I know that's my opinion, but get an education, join the corporate ladder, or start a business and keep pushing and keep working hard, providing for the family. But unless you're able to, unless you've got a great relationship with yourself, you can't have a great relationship with anybody else. And lots of guys that choose to be either insular or shut off from themselves, they're living a life that is, in my mind, quite superficial.
Yeah. I mean, you must have been, at the sharp end of masculinity because you were training commandos. Now, I would suggest it doesn't get much more masculine than running around punching people in the face. I don't know. Is that what commandos do? Do they do worse things than punching people in the face? Maybe. I don't know. But that sort of, did you have to go, that far into the heart of darkness, as it were, in terms of masculinity, to then have the realization, how does that fit with your sort of current understanding of masculinity, if you like, the work you did with the commandos? Yeah.
As I kind of alluded to earlier, the military is a great proving ground for people that are insecure. And, part of my backstory, my dad wasn't present in my life. And at the time, I never really gave any significance to that. But the reality was that subconsciously, it was probably fueling a lot of my motivations. And whether I was promoted ahead of my peers, coming top of military courses. And essentially the job I did was to sit between the Army and the Royal Marines. When the Royal Marines, kind of the counterinsurgency developed in Afghanistan, they needed more people to support them in their warfighting operations. So they use people called All Arms Commandos from the Army support the Marines so they can fight operations. And my role was essentially to sit between the Army and the Royal Marines and to take people through a training package that meant when they went to Lipston to earn their Green Beret, okay, first of all, they wouldn't embarrass the Army because they'd kind of been vetted in a way, but also fundamentally they had the skills to actually go and pass the course, the physical skills and also the mental resilience. So yeah, I'd be running around in the depths of winter in the old Vega shorts and a vest, shouting at people, telling them to hurry up, pushing them to an inch of their lives or where they thought their life would end. And it was kind of a toxic culture. There were people that worked around me, not that worked for me, because I made a point of sacking a few of the people that were in my department when I took it over, because their mindset wasn't aligned to what it was I wanted to create. And the idea, when you see maybe SAS programs on television at the moment about militant, shouting and screaming at people's faces, that, in my mind, that's counterproductive. You can use mechanisms to essentially reduce the number of people that are in training through physical tests, through aptitude tests. And the reality is that what you've got left, those people then, I saw that as my job to be able to train them to have the required standards to go to limited and pass. So it was about coaching and collaboration. But in answer to your question, James, my ego is huge. I was good at what I did. I had a reputation for being a good operator in a military sense. And that's what, when after Sophia was born, that's why I couldn't communicate to my friends, to my family, to my wife, because I had this identity as being a person that people have come to fix their problems. I was a leader of men, 6 foot, fairly good condition, fairly imposing in a sense. And my stoic attitudes essentially enabled me to come unstuck. And I'd gone from a leader of men in the military to essentially, having suicidal thoughts after the birth of my daughter. It was a very difficult time. The catalyst, though, for all this coming back together was me giving myself permission to step away from what was my business for 8 months. Long story short, we went on holiday, myself and my wife, when we were trying to fix our marriage, with the naive idea that we could go to the Maldives, just my wife and I, to a very nice resort, take all our problems to the Maldives, leave them all there, and come back happily married. Whilst it didn't happen in that way, what did happen was that I was reading a book called Legacy about the psychology of the All Blacks, the best, on paper, the best sporting team in the world. And a few sun lounges down, small resorts, so we're kind of in each other's pockets. There's a guy, and he's reading Steve Peters' Chip Paradox, another great book. And after a few days, this guy, he sort of caught my attention. And he said, we must be the only 2 guys in the Maldives reading self-help books. And as guys do when they're trying to, work each other out, there's some superficial bullshit conversation, some humor flying around. And the reality was, he then said, well, we must have our own stories. And I said, you tell me yours first. So I sat there on this beach in the Maldives, white sand, blue ocean, just, perfect idyllic setting. And this guy started to tell me about his life. He was an ex-premiership footballer, played for one of the big London clubs. He'd had a couple of knee operations which hadn't worked. And he'd gone from having this, I suppose, persona that you'd expect of a premiership footballer to a state of depression, which was fueled by his gambling and his drug addiction. And we're lying there on this beach, it's just the most perfect setting. This guy is essentially telling me, his level of conversation I'd never experienced. Never in my life had I had a conversation with another man about actually what he was thinking and feeling in his life. And then he said a phrase which changed the whole trajectory of my life. He said, the only difference between a grave and a rut is the depth. I was like, wow, I was like, straight in my heart, I've just been separated from my wife and my daughter for the last 8 months, from a leader of men to suicidal. And then this guy turns around and tells me exactly what I needed to hear at the most crucial time in my life. And I walked back across the beach to my wife, Rachel. And I said, when we get home, I'm going to shut my business down. She fell asleep on the connecting flight from Dubai to Heathrow. I wrote an exit plan for my business. And a month later, I gave myself permission to step away from everything that I was in my life and take 8 months out. Well, it was only 8 months in the end. If I needed longer, I would have took it. But that's when I really started to connect with myself. I did a lot of deep work around therapy and counseling. I had some good experiences, some bad experiences. I invested in myself and coaching. And quite frankly, the man I am today was born out of my daughter's arrival in this world and me having my own identity crisis.
I'm gonna let you in a minute, Ian. So I just want to pick up a couple of things there. One, was it Paul Merson?
I don't think Paul Merson's capable of one of those conversations.
Hope he doesn't listen.
Gambling, drug addiction, stuff like Paul Merson, right? London club. But second, I think there's really interesting stuff there in terms of, it's very easy to talk about toxic masculinity, and we do, and there undoubtedly I think there is a thing called toxic masculinity. But I also have a certain amount of sympathy with the claim that masculinity per se is not toxic. And it's interesting, the things you're talking about, having an ego. Well, you're good. You're allowed to have an ego if you're good at stuff, but it's a problem when it gets out of hand. And, driving people to within an inch of their life is not necessarily a bad thing per se. And certainly, if it comes with success. But as you say, it's the bits like the stubbornness, and there's certain bits that don't work. But I'm always very wary of we're talking about the Marines and the commandos as if, that is masculinity and somehow per se it is toxic. It's a bit more complicated than that, really, isn't it? I think is the takeaway from that.
And ultimately, when we look at these groups of people and we look at their reputation, they're built on individuals. And it comes down to the individuals, essentially, self-awareness and emotional intelligence. I've always over-indexed perhaps sporting performance or intellect. But the reality is that it's all about our sense of emotional awareness. That's what allows us to connect to ourselves. And that's why when you kind of asked earlier, what do I do? It's about creating that space for men to have the conversations they've never had before, to be heard and listened to in a non-judgmental space. And then for allowing them to unpack those thoughts and feelings and to look at things from different perspectives. And when we change the perspective from which we look at something, the whole reality of everything we've experienced shifts. And then you create choices again in your life, choices you didn't even know existed. You know, people believe that they're trapped, that they can't change, but change is only as difficult as we make it. And I'm proof of that.
I mean, I'm going to jump in because firstly, I guess, Dan, thank you for sharing. Is first off, because you've gone through an enormously complicated and emotionally fraught circumstances quite quickly. And so we're only talking about sort of, is it 3-4 years ago that this all happened, that relationship breakdown? Is that right?
Yes, yeah, essentially.
And now you're in a position where you own your story, or it feels like you very much own your story, and also you can help other men to navigate similar situations. And it feels to me as if that's happened relatively quickly. Now, you did allude to it. You obviously had this conversation in the Maldives with a premiership footballer, and there's a lot to be said there in terms of open and honest conversations, and possibly because you were strangers, it was easier to do. But you also talked about working on yourself and coaching. And I wondered, to have moved from where you were to where you are now, who were the significant people that you turned to and were able to help you in that journey?
It's a great question. There's been a number of people and a number of moments where if our paths hadn't crossed, then I wouldn't be where I am now. One of my clients in my previous business was a international rugby coach, and it was somebody that we had a very mutual, respectful relationship. And when I kind of told him about all the stuff he didn't even know about my life, because I'd hidden it so well behind the masks and behind my false pretense to the world, he signposted me to somebody he knew that ran retreats for men. Absolutely outstanding individual by the name of Craig White. And I found myself in the Peak District. It was a relatively low spend. So I just bank transferred this guy the money. I didn't even read the joining instructions for the course. And off I went to the Peak District for 5 days. If I would have known that what I was letting myself in for was a vegan diet, no caffeine, morning meditation and yoga and spirituality and men's circles, I would not have gone. But the reality is that, there must have been a reason why I didn't do my due diligence. And I found myself in the Peak District, and I'm sat in a room with 9 other men, all of them successful in their own right, multimillionaires, serious business leaders, sportsmen. And for 5 days, Craig facilitated what was, a real catalyst for who I've become. But in answer to your question, what happened on the back of that was that we formed a weekly men's group. And for nearly 2.5 years, every Monday night, regardless of what was happening in our lives, the group that was 10 became 6, the group that was 6 became 4, and the 4 of us stayed in contact for 2.5 years. And every Monday night, we brought a level of authenticity and conversation to our Zoom calls that just didn't exist in our lives. We would help each other, we would hear each other, we would support each other. We'd be a mirror to reflect back perhaps some of the stuff we were hearing on these calls. And every Monday I had the opportunity to check in with these guys and to grow. So from 8 months out to going on this retreat, to investing in counselors and coaches, to a point where like almost all of my subconscious, the work's never done, but a lot of my subconscious, a lot of the things that have fueled who I become, my absent father, my military career, that even been having suicidal thoughts. When you put all that back together, I was able to do it in a very quick time frame. But what it took was a real direction of effort. I stepped away from friendship groups that I felt no longer served who I wanted to become. I realized that my values were kind of just social traits that I'd adopted from other people. I just made a real conscious decision to be congruent, James, to live in alignment and make sure that my actions and my thoughts are all leading me in the direction I want to go. And when I set up Better Men, it was just with the intention of helping other men. And 3 years on, I'm at a point in my life now where You know, my clients have sold businesses for 6 and 7 figures. I've helped many change or reignite their careers, and quite frankly, save marriages as well. And it's really powerful change work, and it's something that I'm very passionate about.
Let's go, Ian. Let's go. Podcast special, Craig White's Retreat for Men. Let's take some recording equipment. Let's go do it, man.
Yeah.
We should totally go on one of these.
I'm also going to give you 2 seconds while I get rid of the cat, okay? That's why I had to go on mute. Stupid cat.
Yeah, right. Ian, let's go on a retreat for men and do a podcast.
I'm scared. I'm scared, though. It scared Dan.
Sounds amazing.
Yeah.
Apart from vegan diet, I don't fancy that much, but, you know.
Yeah.
This sounds like this is a new direction for the podcast. When lockdown ends, we're going to start doing something like that.
Go on the road.
I've just decided.
I don't know. Okay. And I know we're kind of joking, but the reality is there'll be a lot of people in lockdown now that are probably, you know, third lockdown, nearly a year of their lives gone, and they'll be choosing to hide in work. They'll be, you know, choosing probably unhealthy distractions from the reality that shapes their life, and they won't know what to do. And you know, I wouldn't change my story, but for some people, they don't have the outcome that I had unless they have the right people around them.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. So I've talked to people before, friends of mine. So one of my friends stuck in my mind about he was an alcoholic, and when he was looking at his life, he talked about rock bottom, and he talked about waiting until he'd reached rock bottom before he took action. And I wonder how much of that kind of vibe you see in the work with the men you work with.
Initially, that's what I thought would happen with my coaching clients. But the reality is, whether it's just the way that I show up and talk, particularly on LinkedIn, my story is perhaps extreme in a sense, but lots of guys can relate to avoiding, to placing their head in the sand, to burying themselves in work, to getting to a midlife crisis point where they've recognized that despite the success, they're not feeling happy, they're not feeling filled, they're not connected in their marriage or relationships. And they get to a point where, you know, they choose to do something else. A lot of my clients are true leaders. You know, they're leading in their business, they're either in a corporate environment or they're growing the business, but they get to a point where, like I did, like I believe all men do, kind of what got them here won't get them there. And then they sit in this rut. You know, the difference between a grave and a rut is the depth, and they sit in this rut for a period of time. There'll be a spark, there'll be something that's a catalyst for change. And when that happens, that's when people, you know, generally contact me and we have a conversation about what it might look like, what life might look like on the other side.
Interesting. The spark. Yeah. That's you know, I guess it can be anything, can't it? I mean, like for you, it was obviously becoming a dad, but there's 101 different sparks.
Yeah.
For you know, 101, there's whatever. I guess 7 billion, depending on the individual, what's going to be the spark for you. We're against the clock, so we better move on to crack on with the tips. Yeah. Ian's already trailed his, so you know, hit us, Ian. What's your tip this week?
Okay, well my tip, I had 2 tips actually. So I've already given the bonus tip, which is around writing down the done list and using that as a kind of to reflect in terms of what you've done. And give yourself a bit of a pat on the back, because we've always done more in a day, I think, than we believe that we have done. So that's useful. But birds twitching. Okay, so I'm not a twitcher. I'm going to start with I'm not a twitcher. But okay. Hey, this is a good tip. So a couple of weekends ago, we did for the first time, we did the RSPB 1 hour bird watch session. So we sat up in our loft, looked out in the garden, binoculars. I didn't think the kids would be interested. My son sat there for the whole hour, getting very excited by what we could see. Fortunately, we saw more than just wood pigeons. We had 2 species of woodpeckers, jays, all the rest of it. But just sitting there for an hour, I know, we're near the woods.
That's a lot of information for a non-twitcher.
Yeah. But we sit there and we focused on the animals and we focused on the environment, and we were connected with nature, even though we were just sitting in the loft looking at it. And I think just that sense, now I look around and I'm looking out, I know the difference now between a coal tit and a blue tit. And I can identify them. And then just that connection with nature, I think, is a really powerful thing, and just taking a little bit of time out to do that. That's my tip this week.
Well done. You resisted it. I didn't resist it on the day. I did it on the day, and I genuinely was able to message my brother saying, I'm doing the garden watch, and all I've got is a pair of great tits. Because at that point, that is what I had at that point. And then I got 2 coal tits came along after that, and then a magpie or something. That was it. But I was like, well, it was the truth. I wasn't looking for that awful joke. You know, I'm not somebody who approves of Carry On films anymore, but you know, that was just a sentence. It was just
better, James. I expected better.
Just a true sentence. Dan, have you got a tip?
There's a selection of Stoic maxims that I share with my clients, and I think this might be an opportune moment to share them with your audience. And the first is know thyself. It's a common theme, but if people say lip service to it, you know, they only ever get beneath the surface. So know thyself, develop your self-awareness. You know, give yourself permission to slow down to actually look at what's happening around you. The second is that nothing to excess. You know, whenever we take anything to excess, we create a level of intensity in our lives that just isn't sustainable. That could be sport, that can be work, you know, that can even be a relationship. Nothing to excess, because excess proves costly. And the last part of this trilogy of maxims is that surety brings ruin. When we're so certain on what it is that we want to achieve, you know, we become so blinkered in our approach to life in general that we lose the ability to be curious. And yeah, that's what I'd like to leave the guys with today. You know, be curious about who you are, what you want, and where you're going. Good advice.
Good advice.
Very good.
So you've gone for the Stoics. I'm going for Jerry Seinfeld. That's where I'm taking my advice from. You know, don't know what that says about us. Probably says, you know, probably sums up where we are. But I had my attention drawn to a podcast by a man called Tim Ferriss, who's all about, you know Tim Ferriss, right? And he had Jerry Seinfeld on, and it was amazing. I mean, I'm a big fan of Jerry Seinfeld, but this was actually genuine Jerry Seinfeld as opposed to the character who he plays almost the rest of the time. And he said, pain is the sudden onrush of knowledge. So, you know, when you kick the end of the bed and it hurts, that is your brain going, oh, now I know where that end of the bed is. And I just, you know, I was like, oh, that's a good line. And then, you know, there's been a lot of Brexit stuff going on. I mean, they're talking about we can't sell pigs today. And it's like, this again, it's painful and it's the onset of knowledge. It's like, oh, look, you know, this is annoying. Suddenly the knowledge for why it's annoying hits you very quickly. And it applies in all sorts of different ways. I think, you know, it's just a good, you know, whether that is emotional pain or physical pain or whatever, I think it's quite a good, it's a good line about pain is just suddenly knowledge rushing in to fill a void where previously there was a gap in your knowledge. So that's my advice. Really go and listen to the podcast. It's, what is it, tim.blog, I think, and I think you can get all his episodes. There's a printout and all the rest of it, so you can get it all there. So yeah, the Tim Ferriss Show podcast with Jerry Seinfeld. It's from December. It's very, very much, there's lessons for life in there, and it's also very funny.
Dan, where can people go to learn more about what you do?
I'm most active on LinkedIn. Dan Stanley, Better Men Coaching. I show up there Monday to Friday, kind of with the intention of not just to market my message, but to challenge the status quo of masculinity, to get people to take a more authentic look at their lives, and just to engage with people about all topics relating to masculinity.
Fantastic. And that's where I met you. That's where I came across your work, and I thoroughly recommend following Dan on LinkedIn. Dan, thank you very much for being here and sharing your story. It's been really informative, really, really interesting. I think there's a lot of gold there for people to pick over and to understand how they can apply it to their own lives, hopefully, regardless of where they are in the where they are in that rut, whether it's a rut or something slightly deeper. So Dan, thank you very much for sharing. This has been episode number 33 of Lockdown Dads. We will be back next week with another guest, but for the meantime, thank you very much for joining us. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.